everybody. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. We all really appreciate you being here tonight. So before we start, let me tell to the students there are papers going around so you can write your name, the name of your professor, and your email. It's for the ones that they were offered extra credit. You want your extra credit, please write your name. And then give those papers to me. So tomorrow I will email those lists to your professors and they know about that you were here. Okay, my name is Clara Mengolini. I am an assistant professor of Spanish and a faculty associate with the Center for the Study of Economics and Liberty. It is on behalf of the Center for the Study of Economics and Liberty that I want to thank you for being here tonight. The question that we are going to discuss this evening is of tremendous importance, and I'm sure that we are all going to learn a lot. Academic debates and the exchange of ideas are, at the end, what universities should be all about. Before we get started, I want to I already said that. I want to also thank Christian and the Students for Liberty for supporting and promoting this event. As well as for recording it. Let me introduce to you now to the participants of tonight's debate. Is that okay, the microphone? Are you listening okay, everybody? Okay. I will start with Dr. Will Jordan, who will serve as the boss and moderator of tonight's debate. Dr. Jordan is Associate Professor of Political Science and Co-Director of the McDonald Center for American Founding Principles. He has taught in Mercer's Political Science Department and Great Books program since 2003. He received his bachelor's degree from Washington and Lee University and his PhD in political science from Loyola University, Chicago. His primary teaching and research interests involve the history of political thought, focusing on the major thinkers of the Scottish Enlightenment and the American founding. His articles on the political thought of David Hume have appeared in the Review of Politics, Perspectives on Political Science, the Chinese Journal of Theology, and the Ashgate Research Companion to Federalism. He's currently working on the political thought of Henry Adams. Dr. Vasile Stanescu is Assistant Professor of Communication and Director of the Program in Speech and Debate at Mercer University. Dr. Stanescu is co-senior editor of the Critical Animal Studies book series published by Rhoda Brill, the co-founder of the North American Association for Critical Animal Studies, the former co-editor of the Journal for Critical Animal Studies, and former co-organizer of the Stanford Environmental Humanities Project. Dr. Stanescu is the author of over 20 peer-reviewed publications on the critical study of animals and the environments. Dr. Stanescu's research has been recognized by the Woods Institute for the Environment, Marine Animal International, the Andrew Mellon Foundation, the Culture and Animals Foundation, the Institute for Critical Animal Studies, and the Institute for Ruminant Culture, among others. And Dr. Antonio Saravia is Associate Professor of Economics and Director of the Center for the Study of Economics and Liberty at Mercer University. He holds a PhD in Economics from Arizona State University, a Master's in Economics from Georgetown University, and a Bachelor's in Economics from Bolivian Catholic University. Dr. Saravia's research interests lie in the areas of institutional economics, political economy, and the determinants of economic freedom. His work has appeared in highly ranked academic journals. Dr. Saravia is a frequent speaker in college campus and academic and business conferences around the world. He's also a recurrent commentator for major media outlets such as CNN, NPR, and Fox News. I will now let Dr. Jordan explain tonight's rules. And thank you once again for being here, and help me welcome Dr. Jordan, Dr. Stanescu, and Dr. Saravia.
Thank you very much. much. I'll keep this short and sweet. Here's what we'll be doing tonight. Each of our two debaters will have a 15-minute opening argument to be followed by a 3-minute cross-examination by the opponent. Dr. Saravia will go first, followed by cross-examination, then Dr. Stanescu, and then cross-examination again. After that period, each debater will have a 7-minute rebuttal to finish the program, and then there'll be some time for Q&A at the end. So with that, I think we can get started. Dr. Saravia.
Hello. Well, thank you very much once again for being here. This is really what universities should be all about. I want to thank Vas for being game tonight and agreed to discuss this important question with me. And of course, Will and Clark for organizing this. All right. Is social justice just? Let me be 100% clear. Absolutely 100% no. It is not just. Social justice is in fact unjust, and as I'm trying to show tonight, it is actually very dangerous. So let me start my argument with the definition of the law. To put everything in context, what is the law? So the law is an abstract norm of general conduct that applies to everybody without taking into consideration individual circumstances. This last part of the definition of the law is crucial. It applies to everybody without taking into consideration individual circumstances. An action then is considered just if it abides by the law. On the contrary, an action is considered unjust if it violates the law. So, if I kill somebody, or if I commit fraud, or if I steal property, right, I am committing an unjust action because I am breaking the law. Sure? What is justice then? Well, justice is the administration of the law. Justice is the impartial determination of what constitutes a just action and what constitutes an unjust action. Moreover, when justice determines that an action is unjust, it assigns punishment, it assigns restoration of the damage done. So, if I go to Will and I steal his wallet, right, I am committing an unjust action, and justice will punish me and will make me perhaps repay that money. A critical aspect here of what justice is that it is impartial. It needs to be impartial. And the only way for justice to be impartial is to be blind. You may remember Lady Justice, this allegoric representation of justice from ancient Rome. Lady Justice was blindfolded, right? That is, justice cannot take into consideration individual circumstances, cannot see and be influenced by individual circumstances. Thus, if somebody, for example, doesn't pay the rent, then the police show up and evicts that person, even if that person is a single mother of 4 kids and is crying because she doesn't have any place to go, right? Justice cannot be influenced by those tears. Justice cannot be influenced by those circumstances. If it does, we're committing an injustice. Of course, by the same token, justice cannot be influenced by the donations of the political man, or the rich man that is trying to get a verdict in his favor, right? So justice cannot be influenced by the rich person that says, don't evict me because my uncle is going to make a donation to the police department. I cannot be influenced by either or the two contestants, right? So this is very important. This is actually in the Bible. If you remember the Bible, Leviticus 19:15, right? It says, you shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor show favoritism to the rich, but you shall judge your neighbor in righteousness. So, the impartial application of justice means that we are all equal under the law. This is crucial. This is what matters. If that is justice, what is then social justice? Well, social justice is the corruption, the prostitution of this idea of justice. Social justice is what happens when Lady Justice removes the blindfold, right, and is influenced by the circumstances of the contestants. Under social justice, therefore, justice becomes the opinion of the judge or the government or whoever is administering the law about those circumstances. So for example, if the judge or government administering the law don't like to see a small number of rich people and a large number of poor people, then they say, well, once I remove my blindfold, I am influenced by those circumstances, and that becomes evidence of social injustice, right? As a result, the government mandates reparation by redistributing the wealth. So, again, and to make sure that we all understand this, social justice is no longer blind, which is an essential characteristic of justice. Social justice becomes arbitrary. So let's think a little bit more about this. Say the judge's opinion is indeed that wealth must be redistributed. He doesn't like a small number of rich people and a large number of poor people. How do we redistribute wealth? Well, the only way to do it is by coercing the rich or the middle class into paying taxes that then you're going to give to the poor. But you can only get to do this with the use of violence, right? You have to coerce them with the use of violence, with the threat of going to prison. So, never mind if the rich person or the middle class made his or her money legally or justly, respected contract, didn't steal property, etc. It doesn't matter. From a social justice perspective, we justify one of the most unjust actions, which is robbery. We're going to rob this person that did everything fairly because we believe, in our opinion, it is unjust that only a few number of people are rich and the vast majority are poor. Social justice is therefore unjust. But it gets worse than that. If what matters is the opinion of the judge, because they remove the blindfold, and not the impartial application of the law, then obtaining a favorable verdict does not depend on whether you have abided by the law. It depends on how much you can influence the judge. And the opinion of the judge is largely determined by the political ideology imposed by the state. Thus, in order to receive justice, what you need to do is to appeal to the judge by accepting the ideology of the state. Being a free thinker is no longer valuable. It's no longer what matters. The opinion of the judge is what matters. Social justice then not only justifies robbery, in the case of redistribution, but it also coerces you ideologically because it pays to think like the judge. Remember, you have to appeal to their opinion. Now, I am not sure if Vas agrees with me thus far. Perhaps he does. Perhaps he's willing to grant that justice should be ideally blind, and that once we remove the blindfold, all kind of bad things happen. Perhaps he agrees with that. My guess is that he is concerned probably with some important exceptions to this paradigm. He probably thinks that there are some exceptions that justify Lady Justice removing the blindfold and introducing bias in the scale. So let me tackle a couple of these exceptions most commonly identified by the social justice defenders. The first one is income inequality. The judges or the government's opinion here, once they remove their blindfold, is that income differences are unfair, right? That is somehow immoral or not socially desirable that some people have a lot more than some others. But this is strange, isn't it? Why would it be unfair that some people have more than others? If the social process by which some people acquire more was fair, meaning the rich work hard, respected the contracts, didn't steal or influence the political process, then the result is also fair. Now, don't get me wrong. If some particular individuals acquire wealth by influencing the political system, what we call cronyism, then that is certainly unfair, and those people should have their money taken away and go to jail. But that would be the result of applying the law as I defined it earlier, applying justice as I defined it earlier, not the result of an opinion. A large portion of the social justice claim is the evidence of an increase in income inequality in the US since the 1980s, right? So that's Thomas Piketty's famous U-shaped curve of the share of the top 10% or the top 1%. What he claims is that the top 10% in the United States is now capturing 50% of the income in society. That evidence, however, has been severely criticized. It's clearly an outlier when compared to other sources like Geloso 2018 or Alton and Splinter, right? When you analyze the data and scrutinize what they're doing, it turns out that the income of the top 10% in the United States is not very different from the 35% that it has been the historical norm in the United States. And this is only in the United States. Now, if you take a look at the world, what you see is that income inequality, in fact, has been decreasing, right? So you have the Sala and Martin, or Sally Martin and Liberati that show you this. Moreover, the champions of social justice do not consider income mobility, right? Which has been increasing over the last decades. Autumn, for example, in 2013, find that take a look at this, 37 to 47% of the people in the top 1% dropped out of that group only after 1 year. And only 23 to 31% remained there for 6 consecutive years. That is, there is a lot of shuffling around in the different income quintiles in society. So there is a lot of income mobility. The poor have a fair chance of becoming rich. Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, they do not come from rich families. But suppose that we ignore this evidence. Suppose that we grant that income inequality has been increasing. Why should that be a problem? Again, if the process is fair, then the result is also fair. What we need to keep in mind is that the economy is not a fixed size pie. It is a flexible size pie, right? That is, if I get a larger piece of the pie, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will get a smaller one. Think about it. How do you become part of the top 10% or the top 1% in the United States? How do you become a billionaire? The only way to become a millionaire or a billionaire is by producing something that people love, right? In other words, you can only become a billionaire by improving the lives of many, many people. Otherwise, they wouldn't buy your product, right? So Bill Gates got rich because we're better off with Microsoft Excel than with the $50 that it costs Microsoft Excel, right? So therefore, he's increasing the size of the pie and making all of us wealthier, right? That is, although his income is much higher than mine, I am less poor because of him. This is a statistic that I'm going to cite now is going to blow your mind. William Nordhaus from Yale found that innovating companies retain only 2.2% of all the wealth that their innovations have created. So, is income inequality a justified exception for Lady Justice to remove the blindfold? Absolutely not. That will only create more injustice and will not improve the real problem, which is poverty. Let me tackle now a second one of the potential exceptions, systemic racism. The judges or the government's opinion here is that there is systemic racism in the country, particularly against black. And so, Lady Justice must remove her blindfold and compensate for this. But, is there systemic or institutionalized racism in America? Let's see. In 1960, 60% of Americans said that they would never vote for a black president. In 2008, Barack Obama was elected. And 4 years later, in 2012, he was re-elected. That is not systemic racism. Take interracial marriage. Black-white marriages were illegal in 16 states until 1967. In 1958, only 4% of Americans approved of white-black marriages. Today, that number is 87%. That is not systemic racism. What about racial profiling and abuse of blacks by the police? Remember 2014, Ferguson, Missouri. The Department of Justice cleared the officer of any wrongdoing, but accused the police department of racial bias. The statistic that was most mentioned was that 60% of the population in Ferguson were black. But blacks represented 85% of the people stopped for traffic violations. This is actually a pattern that you see in other cities. In New York, for example, the population black is only 25%, but they represent 55% of the people stopped for traffic violations. Evidence of racism, you say? I think not. To understand this, we need to take a look at crime rates. Blacks represent only 13% of the population in the US, but they commit 50% of the nation's homicides. And most of the victims of those homicides are actually black, right? In 2012, the police killed 123 blacks, and that same year, blacks killed 6,000 people, most of them, again, black. What about traffic stops? The National Institute of Justice said in 2013 that 3 out of 4 black drivers admitted that they were stopped for a legitimate reason. The Highway Administration also finds that blacks commit more offenses than white people on every category. This is not systemic racism, it's just reality. So, why is it important to talk about all this? Because, again, social justice is not only unjust, it's dangerous. It justifies injustices and ideological servitude. It motivates rent-seeking and laziness. All you need to do to get a favorable verdict is to demonstrate that you are somehow a victim of your circumstances, right? You have to appeal to the opinion of the judge. It suppresses the individual identity. The individual identity is lost. The group or collective identity is what matters. It leads to bad public policy. Do you know that Seattle public schools will start teaching that math is oppressive? Yeah, apparently for Seattle public schools, math is responsible for imperialism, dehumanization, and oppression of marginalized people, right? According to the new curriculum being proposed, the students will be able to identify the inherent inequities of the standardized testing system used to oppress and marginalize people in communities of color, explain how math has been used to exploit natural resources, and explain how math dictates economic oppression. That is what you get with the idea of social justice. I conclude, therefore, by saying that social justice is not just unjust or unfair, that it is probably the most dangerous idea of these modern times. As Thomas Sowell, famous economist, says, give power to governments to do social justice, you get despotism. Thank you.
We now have a 3-minute cross-examination.
Okay. Why don't I start here? Do you think that there's ever an example of a difference between justice and law?
So justice is the administration of the law, right? So what matters here is how we define law. And law is this abstract norm
Oh, I
of
apologize. I
general
don't mean to
action.
interrupt. I'm just curious, can a law ever be unjust? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
No, because it's a norm of, it's an abstract norm of general action. So it doesn't have a purpose. For example, let me just answer with this example. The law of free speech, right? The law of free speech doesn't say only liberal ideas can be expressed using free speech, or only conservative ideas can be communicated using free speech. It just says you just have free speech. And therefore, we can use that vehicle the way we want. The law is not written with a specific political purpose.
Okay, so I will just give a few examples and just let me know. So if there's a law that says everyone has to speak English, is that a fair law?
Remember, it has to be an abstract norm, so we cannot say you must speak this language. So no, that would be unfair. Right?
Okay.
So the only thing you can say is, for example, you have to carry a passport to enter this country. But
Okay, so if there's a law that says that only white people can eat at a lunch counter, is that a fair law?
no.
Okay. So there is a difference between justice and law.
So justice is the administration of the law, but the important thing here to recognize that the law is an abstract norm, right?
Okay. Moving on. I just want to make sure I understand you correctly, and I don't want to mischaracterize you. Were you arguing that because Barack Obama was elected president, that there is no systematic racism in the United States?
Well, that's just one of the examples, right? So, what did I say? 20% of people, 60% of people said that they would never vote for a black president in 1960, and then Barack Obama wins the presidency. So that is one piece of evidence that there is no systemic racism, but I mentioned many others.
That's true, you did. So, do you believe that when a police officer stops someone for a speeding ticket, it makes no difference whether the person they stopped is white or black?
So if it doesn't matter if they're black or white, when I
Right.
stop...
You think it makes no difference to the police officer?
Oh, I see where you're getting at. So racial profiling. Right. Look, prejudices and racial profiling, we use that all the time, right? I am from Bolivia, and I tell you, I get scrutinized when I go through the airport a lot more than a Canadian citizen. It's just what it is, because, statistically speaking, there are a lot of drug dealers coming from Bolivia, a lot more than from Canada, right? So I get scrutinized a lot more. Should I be offended about that? Yeah, absolutely not. What the police is trying to do is use a statistical measure. From a statistical perspective, more drug dealers come from Bolivia than from Canada. I have to be more careful. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Dr. Stanescu, 15-minute instruction.
sorry, can everyone hear me okay? Is the microphone working? I should have had a flyer made. I'm a little behind. So before I start, I just want to thank a few people. I would like to start with thanking Christian Watson. Christian Watson is one of the most intelligent undergraduates I've had the pleasure of working with. Every time someone comes to the debate team, I ask them what they're passionate about. Christian Watson is the only one to answer the question with Immanuel Kant, followed by a 30-minute discussion of his thoughts about Kant. True story. I would also like to thank our moderator, Will Jordan. I had the pleasure of sitting with him while he discussed Plato, and it was one of the most thoughtful, insightful conversations I had. And allow me to make a joke. I believe that Will Jordan has some of the highest moral character of anyone I know, which is why I asked him to moderate. But when I said, hey, I'm glad you're moderating, he said, good, I take all bribes, big bills only. I would also like to thank Clara, who's organizing this event. And we have a hope of leading to more debates between faculty. As you can see from this turnout, students are very eager to come to debates more than they are just to be lectured at. Yes. And I would also like to thank my competitor, Dr. Saravia. I'm about to argue very passionately against his ideas. That's what we do in debate. We don't hold back. But before I do that, I want to be clear that he has been extremely helpful, that 3 of my top debaters, not just Christian Watson, but Kyle Bligen and Eduardo Rubio, have all taken his classes, benefited from him, and spoke highly of him as both a professor and an educator. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, I want to thank each of you. I'm glad that you came out for this debate. I've recently learned many people don't even know that Mercer has a debate team, so let me assure you that we do. It is actually one of the best in the nation, and it is also one of the most diverse. So if you feel like you are a person who doesn't belong on a debate team, we would love to have you. In defense of social justice. Freedom is not worth fighting for if it means no more than license for everyone to get as much as he can for himself. Dorothy Canfield Fisher. Social justice is a much overused and at times misused word. However, according to the Oxford Reference Dictionary, here is what it actually means. Social justice, the objective of creating a fair and equal society in which each individual matters. Their rights are recognized and protected, and decisions are made in a way that is fair and honest. In other words, the basic meaning is simply that society, hence social, should be fair, hence justice. Social justice means a fair society. The opposite ideology of social justice, what Saravia believes in, is called libertarianism or objectivism. While slightly different ideas, in essence, they both argue the same basic idea: an absolute individual right to property. Which means for libertarians and objectivists, virtually every company and business should have an absolute right to do virtually anything it likes without any type of governmental limitation or balance. In contrast, today, I will provide 3 examples, all thought of and fought for in terms of social justice, that argue that some business rights have to be curtailed to protect individual rights and to help create a fair society. Example 1, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The 1964 Civil Rights Act was a law that, in part, Martin Luther King Jr. fought for and was signed into law by Lyndon Baines Johnson. The law, in essence, had 2 parts. The first part, which libertarians do support, banned the state from discrimination in terms of race. For example, so-called Jim Crow laws or poll taxes, specific laws by state governments that discriminated in terms of race. Libertarians support that part. However, the 1964 Civil Rights Act also made it illegal for businesses to discriminate in terms of race. And this was not an unimportant part of the law. You may remember seeing civil rights activists protesting lunch counters. What they were protesting was the right of the business to say that they would not serve black people just because of the color of their skin. Because of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that is now illegal. Libertarians oppose the second half of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. They believe that a business should have an absolute right to determine who they will and will not serve. After all, remember, they don't really believe institutional racism exists. In other words, they believe that businesses should have an absolute legal right not to serve someone, even if the only reason they're doing so is because they are of a different race. Now let me go in and tell you what Saravia will say in its defense, as is what libertarians always say when you ask them if they support ending the 1964 Civil Rights Act. They will say they're not a racist. They will say they hate racism. They will say racism is antithetical to the core ideas they believe in, which is focused on individuals instead of groups, and that businesses would be foolish to discriminate on race, and they would personally never do so. And to be very, very clear, I do not believe that Dr. Saravia is racist in any way. However, what I do believe is that he supports ideologies, libertarianism and objectivism, that would do real, immediate, and significant harm to African Americans. Because let's be honest, if the 1964 Civil Rights Act was overturned today, there would be businesses here, in Georgia, in Macon, that would start discriminating against African Americans tomorrow. And I do not support the return to green books, books that black folks had to keep just to know who would serve them. I don't believe that anyone should have to go through the shame of being told they will not be served because of the color of their skin. So as a believer in social justice, this is an example where I believe it is correct to limit the rights of some people, racist business owners, to protect the rights of other people, not only black people, but anyone of a different race who just wants to go out to eat, go to a movie theater, ride the bus, and get to sit wherever they like. And let's be clear, libertarians and objectivists believe that there should be no protection from business from discrimination virtually at all. They believe your boss can tell you that he won't hire you because of your race, your religion, your sex, or your gender. They believe even if hired, your new boss can fire you for all of these same reasons. They think banks should be allowed to decide if they will give you a loan based on your race, which was a common practice in the United States until it was finally made illegal. It was called redlining, and it forced African Americans into poor neighborhoods with bad schools because the banks refused to give them a loan to live anywhere else at all. Because of a belief in social justice, that is now illegal. If libertarians had their way, it would be legal again. So listen very closely to his reply. The question is not, at all, is he personally racist? He isn't. The question is, does he believe in the 1964 Civil Rights Act should be overturned? If he's a libertarian or an objectivist, or he agrees with them, then he does. Second example, the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disability Act is a law signed into law by a Republican, George H.W. Bush, the first one, that makes it illegal to refuse reasonable accommodation for disabled people. It is the reason why businesses have to have handicapped parking. It is the reason why there are ramps for wheelchairs. It is the reason why it's legal for a blind person to bring a seeing eye dog onto a bus. Incredibly, libertarians are opposed to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Again, to be clear, they don't want to improve the law or make it better. They are fundamentally opposed to its very existence. Again, as with the 1904 Civil Rights Act, they believe, presumably Dr. Saravia believes, in an absolute right to private property, that no one can ever tell a business what to do. So no one can ever tell a business that they have to serve or accommodate people with handicaps. I've seen the importance of the ADA firsthand. Both of my parents are handicapped. My mother teaches here at Mercer. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she parks in the handicapped parking. She walks up the ramp to her class. She hits the button that makes the door open automatically. But the only reason these things exist at all, the parking, the ramp, the button, is because of the ADA. However, maybe Mercer is good and kind and would have all of these features if there wasn't a law. But what about the rest of the world? Before he passed away, my father was in a wheelchair. I remember this undeserved embarrassment anytime we went to a business that was not ADA compliant, that he couldn't get inside, that he couldn't use the restroom once he was inside. As with race, this is not an experience that anyone should have to have. So again, as opposed to Dr. Saravia, for reasons of social justice, I believe the rights of business owners should be limited to protect the rights of the disabled to simply be able to access those businesses at all. Relatedly, and one of the main reasons I'm here today, I also believe in and support disability benefits. It's part of Social Security. If you're too disabled to be able to work outside the home, the government will pay you a small amount of money each month simply to be able to make ends meet. When I was 5, and part of the reason why I was in that wheelchair, my father was diagnosed with cancer. He physically could not work outside the home. Because of this, we grew up very poor. If any of you grew up poor, you know what it is that I'm talking about. We had mashed potatoes with every meal, spaghetti and mashed potatoes, because they were cheap and filling. We could never go to the dentist. We couldn't afford it. All of my clothes came from hand-me-downs from a teacher that worked with my mother, who had a son who was just a little bit older. But by working together, we were just able to make it. And now I'm a professor, and my brother's professor at Mercer. But I'm here to tell you, if disability benefits did not exist, I do not know if we would have made it. My dad didn't do anything wrong. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he just got sick. Anyone can just get sick. It is uncomfortable to say, but it is true and it has to be said. At the end of the day, libertarianism just lets people die. Example 3, the environment. Climate change is real and it's happening, and we don't have all that much time to prevent truly devastating effects. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned that a rise of temperature of just 1.5 degrees Celsius could lead to ecological, economic, and humanitarian disasters with millions displaced and severe impacts altering human civilization permanently as we know it. Libertarians have no solution to climate change. All they understand is private property. However, no one owns the environment. They're opposed to a Green New Deal, they're opposed to a carbon tax, they're opposed to everything. But it's not just climate change. Libertarians, Saravia, wants to abolish the Environmental Protection Agency. He wants to abolish the Food and Drug Administration. He doesn't want anyone to make sure that your water you drink is safe. He doesn't want anyone to make sure that the food you eat is safe. He's opposed to the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. He's opposed to government regulation to prevent asbestos or lead poisoning. Every single thing would just be buyer beware. In conclusion, let me explain why I've come here today. I'm busy trying to offset the effects of climate change, trying to make the world more intersectional and caring. But I've taken time out to come to this debate because libertarians and objectivists are targeting you. They tell you what they want is freedom, and who isn't for freedom? They tell you what they want is lower taxes, and who doesn't want lower taxes? They tell you what they want to do is legalize weed. I don't do any drugs. I don't even drink. Even I think weed should be legal. And they point out problems with different governmental programs, many of which are true. Virtually every program I mentioned today could be done better and improved. But I'm here to tell you what they won't tell you. Libertarianism is a dangerous ideology. It ends every protection based on race and sex. It undoes every protection on disability. It is opposed to virtually every single governmental protection of the environment, and even things you would think every single person could agree on, like clean water, food that won't make you sick, or clean air. I'm not opposed to individual rights. When Saravia first asked for this debate, I told him I believe in and support individual rights and suggested he try to find someone else to debate. But there has to be a balance, a fairness, a social justice in our society. No one should have the right to discriminate. And for some things, we need collective action and collective solution that only a society of people coming together can solve. And that is why we need social justice. People are dying. Entire species are dying. The planet is dying. And the simple truth is that libertarianism is nonsense. And we are out of time for nonsense. Thank you.
Now I have another 3-minute cross-examination.
Thank you very much. That was inspiring in a way. It's very difficult to counter-argue, such emotional statements when it has to do with your family and so on. So I truly respect that. The first thing that I wrote in my notes here is your definition of social justice. You said that is all about a fair society. So I'm troubled here by the definition of fair society. So what do you think fairness is?
Right. So I would say, for me, fairness means, and I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who first defined it this way. Fairness, at least in part, means that if you're thinking in terms of a poker game, there's no cheating in the dealing. Everyone gets a fair chance.
Right. So it doesn't mean equitable.
It is not my argument that all the results would be the same. Absolutely not. Some people may want a 50-foot screen, 8K television. I don't. They might be willing to work harder for that. Sure. But what I would say is that certain basic things, like food, or healthcare, or a safe place to live, everyone should have that.
Which brings my second question, if I have a little bit of time. How do you propose that we achieve that? So after all of those things cost money and resources, right? So where are we getting the money to provide for food or basic shelter and so on and so forth?
I mean, the actual amount of the budget is vast. If we just decrease the amount that we spend on the military, and by the way, if you counted it up, it's something like we have a larger military than the next 30 countries combined, you could easily provide something like healthcare or food for anyone in the country who needed it. And you wouldn't actually increase the government, you would decrease it.
Okay, but that is coming from taxes, right? So it has to come from some. So essentially we're coercing some people to provide for these needs.
So I don't believe in your analogy that a tax represents something that's inherently coercive. I think of it more as like a pool. You put $1 in, I put $1 in. Neither one of us know who's going to get sick. So sure, if I'm the one who gets sick, you have to pay out the $1. But if you're the one who gets sick, you get my $1. That's not the opposite of fairness, that's the definition of fairness.
Thank you. All right. Here comes the best part. All right. So again, that was an important and emotional statement. I am still troubled by Dr. Stanescu's definition of fairness. He seems to think that fairness involves providing basic needs, that everybody should have a chance in your words. And the only way to have this, the only way to have this chance is by securing certain basic elements like shelter or food and so on. But I'm troubled by that idea because, after all, however minimum that budget he thinks he is, that money has to come from somewhere. It has to come from people that have produced it, that have produced that wealth that now the government or the social justice defender wants to redistribute, right? So essentially that has to come from people that have gone through a very fair process and just process to generate this wealth, and now the government is going to take it away from them for a very important, and emotional and social principle, which is we want to give these people basic needs. But nevertheless, it is an imposition, it is a coercion. And if you don't believe it is a coercion, try next April 15 not to submit your taxes and see what will happen. The police will come and get you, literally. Literally, they will come and get you. And if you say, wait a second, I see taxes as a pool in which we put $1 and then you remove the dollar, so don't take me away, don't take me to prison. They will put a gun on your head and they will take you to prison. It is illegal not to pay taxes. It is, at the end, a coercion. So I think it would be more fair for social justice defenders to just say openly, I want to secure these basic needs, but I'm going to do it through the use of violence, period, because that's what it is. Second element that I want to point out here. What has been the most important tool for black folks in terms of economics? What has done most for black people, for Hispanics, for minorities, has been capitalism. There is absolutely no way we could have improved, all of us, our standards of living without capitalism and economic freedom. If you take a look around the world and you see the countries that are more capitalistic, you see the countries with most economic freedom, you will inevitably see there is tons of evidence on this. Most capitalist countries do much better in terms of lifting people out of poverty. Let me give you this statistic. If you take the countries in the high quartile of economic freedom, the poor people there in those countries with high levels of economic freedom is 25 times wealthier than the poor people in countries with no economic freedom. So if we want to lift people out of poverty, which I think that's something we will coincide, right? What you need is more freedom, no less freedom. Now freedom means, yes, do whatever you want, so long as you don't bother other people. That's the basic principle, yeah? So that means if I want to pitch in and give some money to help people with disabilities or help people that are poor, that is my right to do so. It's not the right of the government to tell me that I should do that. That is coercion. Collectivism, as Nobel Prize Friedrich Hayek used to say, collectivism is slavery. Do I have okay, so on climate change. So, you know, the last 2 minutes of Vasile's intervention reminded me of Greta. Greta, who portrayed a very terrible landscape, and she actually thinks that the kids should not go to school because what's the point, right? The planet is going to be over before they graduate. When you think about climate change, what countries take most care of their environment? Ask yourself. Is it the poor countries or the rich countries? It is the rich countries. The United States today has more wooded area, more forest area than it used to have 50 years ago. The same is true with Europe. The same is true with Chile in South America, which is the country with the highest level of economic freedom. So if you really want to protect the environment, what you need to do is to grow, is to improve, is to increase the wealth of the country. And again, you only get that with capitalism, with economic freedom. Or ask yourself, is Venezuela richer now than it used to be with socialism? Is Cuba richer today? Is North Korea richer today? Is Argentina richer today than when they used to be capitalists? So if you want to protect the environment, what you need is more freedom, not less freedom. And yes, that involves getting rid of coercion. All right, I'll stop there.
celebration time for their talks, and so we will take some of that right now.
What do we do?
Whisper among yourselves.
Unfortunately, Dr. Saravia failed to answer back any of my central arguments. One, the Civil Rights Act. Remember, specifically, in my speech, I told you that he wouldn't talk about the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and then in his rebuttal, he didn't. Now let me give you an example of how this would work in practice. Saravia, along with many other libertarians, believes in the ending of public schools, not to reform them, not to make them better. He's opposed to public schools simply existing at all. Since libertarians also favor ending the second half of the Civil Rights Act, in practice, that means every single school in this country could be resegregated by race, and at least some would be. Let us not pretend that racial discrimination by private business owners is wholly a thing of the past. In September of 2019, this year, in Mississippi, a wedding venue refused to marry a couple. The reason? They were an interracial marriage. Two, the Americans with Disabilities Act. To the degree I have an answer, it is that we can chip in to help disabled people if we want to. However, there is a fundamental difference between charity and justice. Disabled people deserve the right to go into a building, to shop, to go to school, to go to a business, not because of your charity, but because they are people in this country. The truth is that we will all, if we are lucky, become disabled. All of us, if we live long enough, will need some extra help. Elevators to move up buildings, close parking, signs large enough for us to be able to read them. Even if the ADA did not help everyone, it is something we should still support because it is right and just and moral. But it is also true that universal access that helps disabled folk, in reality, helps everyone. Third, disability benefits and childhood poverty. To the degree I have an answer to this, it is simply that capitalism helps to end poverty. If you'll listen, my talk actually didn't say that we should just end capitalism. It said even if we have capitalism, we still need to provide for people's basic needs. And he has not answered back my argument that disability benefits and childhood poverty. The truth is that not everyone can or should have to be employed. In a fair society, we should help to provide for these people. Who wants to live in a society that will not even do that? Saravia likes to justify his views with the story of someone robbing a person sleeping and giving away their money as a way to make fun of programs that help others. But this is a false analogy. In reality, what we are doing, all of us, is pooling our money. None of us know which of us might get sick or disabled. So yes, if we don't get ill or become disabled to the degree we can't work, the other people in the pool do have to pay the difference. But that is not unfairness. That is the definition of fairness. And let's talk and focus on childhood poverty and hunger, because I am not alone. 1 child in every 7 will be born into poverty in the United States. Indeed, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, America has one of the highest childhood poverty rates of any industrialized country on the planet. And according to KidShare 2015, reports on the federal expenditures on children by the Urban Institute, the total federal expense of all government programs on children was less than 10%. The amount that was spent on the military, over 17. And just to be clear, many of these children are going hungry. 11 million children in the United States today face hunger. But no child in a world overflowing with food should ever have to go hungry. And finally, the environment. Climate change is real. It is happening. If we act collectively and soon, we have a chance to prevent catastrophic effects. If we don't, we can't. As the United Nations, a normally reserved and cautious body, currently explains on their website, quote, "Climate change is the defining issue of our time, and we are at a defining moment. From shifting weather patterns that threaten food production, to rising sea levels that increase the risk of catastrophic flooding, the impacts of climate change are global in scope and unprecedented in scale. Without drastic action today, adapting to these impacts in the future will be difficult, costly, or impossible." 99% of climate scientists believe in climate change. 99% believe that we need significant, collective, and yes, government action to address the problem now. Almost none of the top political leaders, from the right or the left, will see the worst effects of climate change. Not Trump or Biden, not Warren or Sanders, not Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi, none of them. But if we don't take action now, all of you will. You will pay the price. From civil rights to disability to poverty to the environment, what the world needs is social justice. What we do not need is libertarianism. Libertarianism is nonsense, and we are out of time for nonsense.
That's the conclusion of the formal portion of the debate. I think we're going to have time for 15 minutes or so of Q&A. And okay.
Just raise your hand when I ask a question.
Hello. I have a question for Professor Saravia. Okay, so assuming libertarian, like, or your views are like correct, wouldn't it only be beneficial if everybody like knew the statistics that you were like proposing? So, like, just based off both yours, like you were using more like appeals to like emotion, and his were more like appeals to like logic and like statistics. But can you only say, let's say like with the, you said that if someone got stopped by like a policeman and they were like African American, that statistically, because they commit more crimes, it would be okay, it would be permissible for them to have more like caution. But that only works if the policeman does know that fact. Like if the policeman doesn't know that like they commit X amount of the crimes, X amount of the times, how do you like justify that?
We don't have a microphone, but
Here you go, man.
yeah, so of course it wouldn't hold, right, if the person is agnostic about the statistics. All I'm saying here is, look, prejudice and bias have a purpose. If you are walking in the forest and you see a bear, don't you run away from the bear? You do, because your prejudice is that bears kill people in the forest, and it would be dangerous to get closer to it. You're using statistical evidence. You're using the information that you have, your prior. Now, this prior, we use Bayesian learning. If you've taken theory to Dr. Reagan, we use Bayesian learning, and these priors get updated. But all you're using is your statistical evidence. So, when a police officer stops a black person, is more careful or scrutinizes a little bit more, he's using the statistical evidence. What you need to do, right, and everybody needs to do is say, yes sir, put your hand here, put your other hand on the wheel, and just cooperate with the police. They are using just their prior, so.
Okay, so I'm a minor in Africana Studies, and I took high offense to many of the things that you said. If you would watch the documentary, The 13th, on Netflix, I feel like it would help you give a basis on systematic racism, because for a lot of reasons, it's the reason why there is a lack of capital built within the African American communities. For the simple fact that my parent, my father, because I'm mixed, he is not going to be able to get a co-signed loan because we don't have anybody who had credit going back to the 60s, because you're acting like the 60s was so far away. It wasn't. This is my grandmother. So if my grandmother wasn't able to co-sign for a loan for my father, then my father is also not able to co-sign for a loan for me, then there's no way for me to have financial prosperity. While somebody else that is white, their family has probably had long generational wealth coming through here. And it's also the main thing that has to completely always be focused on is the fact that most Africans did not choose to come here. There was no way of saying that they walked up to the boat and said, hey, I want to go to the New World. That wasn't the consensus. So, and for you to disregard that fact is very wrong. And for you to almost say, like, are you saying that it's okay that the 6th leading cause of death for African American males is by police gunfire? And have you not watched, what about Trayvon Martin? He was walking down the way with a bag of Skittles in his pocket. Okay, he did not ask for that. He was told not to follow him. Do you think it's okay that I live in fear for when I have children? That because most like they're going to be dark-skinned males. You think it's okay that I live in fear that somebody random is going to shoot my child?
Absolutely.
Do you
not.
think that it's okay for any of that? But all of this is an effect of systematic racism. It's also more likely for an African American male to be in prison than to have the ability to even have any mobility. Plus, also, do you know that as far as like we're just looking at a simple rule, which started most of mass incarceration, was the fact that they made it where an ounce of cocaine is a felony, while 100 ounces of, an ounce of crack is a felony, and 100 ounces of cocaine is a felony. That's the equivalent. And cocaine at the time and today is used more by white people than it is by black people. And the statistics are clear that on each side, that everybody uses drugs. Everybody is dealing drugs, and most of the time when people get drugs, they're getting it from people of their own color. But African Americans are more likely to be arrested for drug crimes, which makes up a large majority of the prison systems at this current moment.
I get 100% your point. I think you made it really clear. I just want to give time to Dr. Stanescu to answer as well if you want about this. So let me just take a first stab at this. First of all, I absolutely not believe that it is okay for people to suffer injustices because of the color of their skin. I think we're clear, everybody, on that. What I'm saying here is that that is not due to systemic racism, okay? So the data that I pointed out was that when you take a look at crime rates, right? Black population is only 25% of the country, and yet they commit 50% of the crimes. So when a police stops a black person for a traffic offense, which the Department of Justice also says that blacks commit more traffic offenses than whites, then that statistic becomes a prior for the police officer. We need to be extremely careful here, because priors are helpful, as I said with my example of the bear in the forest. But we need to understand that those priors are updated, throughout history. And so things get better and better for blacks. And again, the thing that has done the most in minorities is freedom. Without it, wouldn't be able to escape out of poverty. Let me give you just one more statistic, and I'm going to give it to Dr. Bass to be fair. In 1890 and early 1900s, a black kid was slightly, believe it or not, slightly more likely to grow up in a nuclear, intact family than a white kid. That's 1900, check your sources. Okay? By 19, yeah. Hold on. I'll let you talk. Let me talk. Okay. A kid growing up without a dad. Why do I bring this up? Because a kid growing up without a dad is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop off of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. So the problem, and you ask why the black population is poorer than the white population, the big culprit here is the disintegration of the family. So taking a look at the facts, taking a look at the statistics will help you understand that there is no systemic racism. That is not to say that racism is okay. I hope I made myself clear.
Thank you. I agree with you. Thank you for raising those points. They could not be more pertinent. There's been a lot of discussion of statistics, so let me provide you with a statistic. For every $100 of wealth that a white family has, the black family has 5 cents. Now, why is that? Right. So you either have to imagine that either you have a racist idea that somehow black people aren't just smart or hardworking, you have to blame the family, we'll get to that in a second, or you have to realize that there's a history. Libertarians and objectivists actually should be the ones most in agreement with you. What they hate the most is taking someone's labor without compensation. It is the most antithetical idea to libertarianism that exists. As you point out, that is exactly what happened. Your labor was taken without compensation. And let us not pretend, as you point out, that this microphone has enough battery. That this somehow magically ended when slavery was ended. As you point out, after slavery was sharecropping, which was in essence slavery under a different name. After the sharecropping was Jim Crow, which in essence was slavery under a different name. Currently we have the prison industrial complex in Georgia, in Louisiana, in Texas. They've actually bought whole plantations, and predominantly black and brown people were forced to work low pay or no pay on the same farms. So, yes, we need true social justice to help. And let me just briefly add about this family. Yeah, sorry. I guess up here. Let me just briefly add about this family argument that we hear all the time. Let's not pretend that the African American family has problems without the context that causes those problems. Yes, it's true that there is a breakup of the quote-unquote traditional nuclear family, which, by the way, is not the only okay family someone can have. But additionally, let's not pretend that that's not in part because of racial profiling, that people are being taken away to jail, or that people have to work multiple jobs in order to support their families. Let's not confuse the cause, right, and the symptom. The history, the legacy of racism is partly what helps destroy the nuclear family and the black family. That's not what is causing the problems. So thank you.
So my question is to Professor Stanescu. You mentioned the Green New Deal as well as the Paris Climate Accord, correct? And we're talking about this whole issue of climate change, the world ending within 12 to 2 to 3 or 4 decades from now. So you mentioned the Green New Deal, which will cost about $51 to $93 trillion in the next decade. And you also mentioned about restricting the military budget, which is only $690+ billion. Nowhere near a trillion. So you want to do this Green New Deal when we have no money to pay for it. We're already in trillions of dollars of debt. So my question to you is, what do you expect to accomplish if we try and do a deal that will cost $93 trillion if it's only going to help decrease the temperature by 0.05%? Thank you.
Christian, can you bring it up that way? Let me read you a quotation from John Holdren. He is the Teresa and John Hines Professor of Environmental Policy at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Quote, "We know without any doubt the climate is changing in ways that are not explainable by natural influences and that are precisely explainable as a consequence of heat-trapping gases that are added to the atmosphere by fossil fuel burning and deforestation. We know the damaging impacts are already occurring all around the world. In some parts of the world, we're seeing drastic increases in heat waves. We're seeing torrential downpours. We're seeing associated flooding. We're seeing melting of the permafrost. We're seeing increased coastal erosion. All of these things are occurring in patterns and with fingerprints that tie them directly to changes in climate that the humans are causing. And therefore, it is absolutely essential, if we are to avoid catastrophic impacts of climate change, that we turn around this problem starting now." That quote was from 2015. I don't have a particular policy that I say we need to do or not do. I'm not saying we have to do the Green New Deal. What I'm saying is that we have to do something now. Here's how it's going to work. You say it's only going to solve a small amount of change. According to the United Nations, that small amount of change can be crucial. At 1.5%, we lose 60% of all coral reef in the world. At a 2-degree change, we lose all of it. At 1.5%, the best estimates suggest that we will experience some loss of ice in the Arctic. At 2%, we lose all of it. Small amounts of changing are essential. There is no planet B. We cannot live on money. Thank you.
Let me add to that a little bit. I think the question is important because it points out a trade-off, something that economists have present all the time. We all want to reduce temperature. We all want, people to have shelter. We all want people to have food. We all want people with disabilities to be able to go shop. What we need to consider, and I think the question is important, is the trade-offs, right? That's going to cost something, and therefore we're not going to be able to do something else. Moreover, that money is going to come from people that perhaps do not agree with this, do not agree again with the opinions of the people judging or the government administering the law. Again, when Lady Justice takes off the blindfold, we are all at the mercy of the opinions of people. You can have an opinion and say, this person should be able to go in there or should go to be able in there. That's your opinion, and what you're doing is forcing others to pay for it. That's the problem with social justice.
Okay, so first off, I think the discrimination on the 1964 Civil Rights Act that libertarians make, the reason why we support one half and not the other half, is the important difference between discrimination coming from government, the system, and discrimination coming from the individual. It's one thing to say that discrimination shouldn't come from the system or from the government. It's a completely different thing to say it shouldn't come from the individual. So I have a question for Stanescu. If the system is inherently racist, as you claim it is, then why would you give more power and more money and more control to said system?
Yeah, no one should have the right to discriminate. That should just not be a right. If you're discriminating in terms of race, gender, or disability, I have no problem limiting a quote-unquote individual right to discriminate on something that no one should have the right to discriminate on. In terms of giving more power to the system, let's not group everything together and pretend that it's just one holistic mess. And let me also not say that somehow I think government is perfect. I don't. I think there are real, serious problems of government that need to be addressed and changed. My problem is that libertarians and objectivists, by and large, do not work to change those problems. They just want to get rid of those programs completely. Can laws be improved? Yes, and we desperately need them to be improved. And we desperately need you to help improve them. But when you just decide that you're going to reject law, period, then we don't get your help in making those laws better. And that's what we need.
Although, so I do need to ask you this. So are you really saying that because you believe that people should not discriminate, then we should force everybody not to discriminate? That we should go in their minds and say, you should like everybody, you cannot not like people? Is that what you're saying? You're saying, we're going to get into everybody's brains, and we're going to say, this is what you can think, this is what you cannot think. You see again the danger? You see, I think, the danger of removing the blindfold? I believe that you have a very honest and compassionate mind. And I think that you're doing this because you love people. But the other side of it is that you are imposing this idea on others. You just said that you have absolutely no problem forcing everybody to like everybody. Or not to discriminate, which is to say, not to discriminate. Right. So, you are getting into people's brain and telling them that they should not discriminate. What about the freedom of thinking?
Hi. Okay. Cameron Dawkins, debate team. I want to preface this by saying I respect you as a person, and I respect you as a professor. Yes. But I am going to be 100% candid. So first I'd like to address what you just said, where you explicitly justify racism on the individual level. Please don't ever do that again. And then what Dr. Saravia said, and previously when you gave an analogy to a police officer stopping a black man, and equating that to seeing a bear in the forest, not only plays into the portrayal of black people as dangerous and savage and uncivilized.
Oh, come on.
So no, what I'm asking is that is saying a black person is an animal, a bear, a savage animal is racist, and I ask that you please never do that again. But then my question is one that first requires you to, it has a preliminary question. So in your framework about the resolution, you said that the law is universal without individual circumstance, and that the law dictates just and unjust. Is that in an ideal world, or are you saying in this current world?
That's what it is to me.
And so you're saying that all laws that have ever existed are just?
No, careful. Can I answer now?
Yeah.
Okay. So, no, we have to be careful here. An action is considered just if it abides by the law. An action is considered unjust if it doesn't abide, if it breaks the law. So if I commit murder, I am breaking the law, and therefore I'm committing an unjust action. I need to be taken to jail. Now, on your first statement of putting together the black man and the bear, come on. I mean, what is it? I even said, look, I get scrutinized more out of the airport because I'm Bolivian, right? And if you take a look at statistically, most drug dealers come from Mexico, number 1, right? Colombia, number 2. Guess what country is number 3? Bolivia. That's why I get scrutinized at the airport. So it is a good principle not to offend people. I think we all agree on that. But it's also a good principle not to take offense when none is intended. Although we need to do this organized.
I've struggled with the idea of exactly kind of what you're saying in the way that we should not control what certain people think. But I think that it's a little bit, it's hard to say. There are people in this world, and some may say that they have mental issues or whatever, but there are people in this world who think that it is okay to kill other people. There are people in this world that think that it is okay and right to tell other people to not discriminate. And I do understand where you're coming from with that, because that's saying that they should not be allowed to have the free will of thought. But that should then, if you were to consider that, go with literally every other thing that you can think of. That would mean that there's absolutely no absolutes in this world, which would cause chaos, correct? That's kind of, I guess, my first, I don't know, well, because I think that kind of leads into the idea of if you were to say, okay, you know, all private institutions have the ability to discriminate, then I think that in the world that we're living in today, that would mean that Black people would eventually become the bear, right? So if you look at it in a way that, let's say that all schools become private institutions, say, you know what, we're just not going to let Black people in. I think that eventually that would completely segregate us as people. So what you're saying is that people should be able to discriminate if they would like to, and that everybody has that ability, then how does that not tear us apart as a world?
Because it gives you the freedom which is the principal base foundation of this country. You are free to think whatever you want to think. Now, there is a law that says you cannot attack people, you cannot take their property rights, right? You cannot attack their person or the property, and that's where we draw the line. But to tell people how to think is an invasion of their freedom, is coercion. And by the way, I've been called a libertarian. I should clarify, I would consider myself a classical liberal rather than a libertarian, but that's...
I think we're almost out of time, so I'll just make, is that correct? I'll just make a couple of concluding thoughts to your question, and hope to clarify for you as students, even separate from this debate. Please do not group or categorize people by statistical norms that you hear. In reality, that's antithetical even to libertarianism, which is supposed to see people as individuals and not in terms of their group identity. We can have lengthy debates about if these numbers have been true. There are no crime rates, there are only arrest rates. But even if they're true, what a group number says nothing about you as an individual or anyone else. If you leave here today as students with nothing else, please take that with you. Finally, I would say that libertarianisms or classical liberals say that what they believe in is freedom. But I don't think that's true. Getting to sit where you want or go where you want, that's freedom. Getting to tell somebody they can't do that is where one freedom conflicts another, and we can easily decide which freedom should win in that scenario. Finally, just to be clear, I'm not trying to tell anyone what to think or believe. What I'm talking about is action. People may think terrible things, but at least collectively, in terms of social justice, we can stop them from acting on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saravia, Dr. Stanescu, Will, for moderating. Last semester we had another debate with Dr. Nikos Bere, that is here tonight. It was amazing, and this debate also, I think it was great. I love to see all of you guys here. I told today to my students that it's important for you guys to be exposed to different ideas and then find your own voice. But as you can see, we have here two very smart, good people that think completely different, and it's great that you can be exposed to this and understand that we all have different ideas of the world. So thanks again for being here. I think it's very important. And remember to give me back those signing sheets so I can email to your professors. And once again, please help me. Let's clap.